Gladiator was a production miracle that had no business becoming a masterpiece. The script wasn't finished when cameras rolled, the lead actor was recast weeks before shooting, and one of its most beloved cast members died before his final scenes were ever filmed. By every measure, this film should have collapsed under its own chaos. But chaos, it turns out, was exactly what the story needed. The overnight rewrites, the on-set injuries, the desperate improvisation, all of it bled directly into Russell Crowe's performance, in ways no director could have planned. The brutality behind the cameras quietly became the brutality on screen. What you're about to discover goes far deeper than the glory and the grandeur. These are the decisions made under pressure, the accidents that became iconic moments, and the secrets that most viewers never connected to what they were watching. Because before Maximus ever stepped into that arena, the film had a completely different hero in mind. And the reason that changed tells you everything about how Gladiator really got made. Number 1. The hero that never existed. Before Russell Crowe ever donned armor, Gladiator was a completely different film, and not a better one. The original screenplay placed a Roman senator at the center, with gladiatorial combat pushed to the edges as mere political backdrop. Studio executives read the early drafts and immediately recognized the problem. There was no one to root for. Political maneuvering doesn't bleed. It doesn't grieve. It doesn't make an audience lean forward in their seat. Writer David Franzoni went back to the beginning. The pivot he made was fundamental, away from Senate chambers and toward a fallen general stripped of everything he'd earned. That shift rewired the entire story. Personal loss replaced political abstraction. The quest for justice became something visceral rather than procedural. Maximus wasn't just a protagonist. He was a wound walking through ancient Rome. Multiple rewrites sharpened him further. The grief, the rage, the quiet dignity under impossible circumstances. Without that foundational rethink, Gladiator would have been a footnote in the genre's long history of forgotten experiments. Number 2. The road that built an empire. Long before a single frame was shot, the DNA of Gladiator was being assembled on a motorcycle. Writer David Franzoni didn't research this film from a library. He lived his way into it. His journey spanned continents, Europe into the Middle East, across India, through Thailand and the Malay Peninsula, finally into Australia. It wasn't tourism, it was an extended immersion into the ruins and rhythms of civilizations that had risen and collapsed long before anyone thought to document them. Every region deposited something into his imagination. Ancient sites, local histories, the particular way light falls on stone that has outlasted every empire that built it. But the moment that crystallized everything came in Baghdad, where Franzoni found a book about gladiators in a market and felt something click into place. That purchase, made thousands of miles from Hollywood, became the seed the entire film grew from. His global odyssey gave Gladiator something most historical epics lack: a genuine curiosity about what these worlds actually felt like from the inside. The themes of honor, survival, and the brutal collision between civilization and barbarism didn't come from a history textbook, they came from the road. Number 3. One painting changed everything. Ridley Scott was not an easy sell. He'd built his reputation on films of precise visual intelligence, and gladiator epics were a genre that hadn't worked commercially in decades. The script intrigued him, but intrigue wasn't enough. Then someone put Jean-Léon Gérôme's 1872 painting, Police Verso, in front of him. The image stopped him cold. A victorious gladiator stands over his fallen opponent, waiting. The crowd fills the stands above, arms extended, thumbs turned down. The colors are dusty gold and deep shadow. The violence is completely still, and somehow more frightening for it. Gérôme had captured something that no modern filmmaker had managed to translate onto screen: the idea that gladiatorial combat could be simultaneously beautiful, horrifying, and genuinely cinematic. That painting became Scott's visual Bible for the entire production. Its gritty realism, its dramatic use of light and shadow, its refusal to sanitize the brutality, all of it fed directly into the aesthetic choices that define the film. One 19th century canvas unlocked a 21st century epic. Number 4. The armor Commodus never actually wore. History gave the costume department very little to work with when it came to Commodus. The real emperor was vain, unstable, and obsessed with his own mythology, but the archaeological record of what he actually wore into his staged arena performances is fragmentary at best. So the team invented something more revealing than any historical document could have provided. The Black Eagle helmet. The dark, predatory metalwork. Every piece of Commodus's armor was engineered to express a specific psychological truth. A man performing power he didn't actually possess. The eagle suggested dominance he couldn't command through respect alone. The darkness reflected a moral corruption he couldn't quite hide beneath the imperial trappings. Early concept sketches explored ornate golden designs that emphasized wealth and grandeur. They were rejected precisely because they made Commodus look too convincing as a ruler. The final armor told a different story. When Joaquin Phoenix wore it, something uncomfortable registered immediately. This man was dressed for a role he hadn't earned. The costume didn't just clothe the character, it diagnosed him. Number 5. The line nobody wrote. Scripts get rewritten. Dialogue gets polished. And then there are the moments that arrive from somewhere else entirely, the ones no writer planned, no director staged, and no producer could have budgeted for. Are You Not Entertained? Was one of those moments. The scene called for something different. Russell Crowe had just fought through multiple opponents under the Moroccan sun, bloodied and running on exhaustion that wasn't entirely performance. Standing in front of the roaring crowd, something shifted in him. Not Crowe deciding what Maximus would do, but Maximus arriving at a conclusion about where he was and what was being done to him. The line came out. The crew went quiet. What Crowe had found in that moment was the precise intersection of fury, contempt, and grief that defined the character. Maximus wasn't just taunting the crowd, he was indicting them. He was reducing the spectacle to its naked transaction. Your entertainment, purchased with my suffering. That single improvised line became the moral center of the entire film, and it arrived because the right actor was given the right amount of pressure at the right moment. Number 6. They actually burned the forest. The Germania battle that opens Gladiator doesn't feel like a film set. It feels like a document of something that actually happened, because in a meaningful sense, it was. Ridley Scott wanted real fire, real smoke, real chaos. Not the kind added in post-production, where everything is controlled and nothing is dangerous. The kind that gets into your lungs and makes your instincts override your training. The production identified a forest in England that was already scheduled for government-approved clearing. That bureaucratic fact became a creative opportunity. With authorization secured, the pyrotechnics team staged controlled burns of a scale rarely attempted on a film set. Timing was everything. Safety crews positioned, actors briefed. A single window to get it right before the forest was gone. The result is visible in every frame of that sequence. The smoke is real. The heat distortion is real. The expressions on actors' faces reflect genuine physical stress. No amount of digital fire replication produces the same physiological response in a performer, and the camera catches that difference. The battle works because the danger wasn't entirely simulated. Number 7. Building Rome from scratch. The actual Colosseum is a protected site. You can visit it, photograph it, and stand inside it. But you cannot film a major motion picture in it, which meant Ridley Scott needed to build one. What rose from the ground in Malta was roughly 1/3 of the arena reconstructed at full scale. Detailed stonework, underground chambers, the full texture of ancient stonework, laid by a crew working from historical records and architectural research. It was an enormous physical achievement on its own, but the full Colosseum required something more. Visual effects artists took the practical construction and extended it digitally, upward, outward, and eventually outward into a crowd of tens of thousands. Crowd replication software layered multiple passes of extras into the stands until the arena felt genuinely populated. Strategic camera angles concealed the seams between real stone and its virtual extensions. The lighting was matched with obsessive precision so that the digital additions cast the same shadows as the physical set. The result was so seamless that audiences simply accepted they were seeing the ancient world restored, and that was exactly the point. Number 8. Real tigers, fake danger. The arena sequences required actual tigers, not representations of tigers, not digital approximations, the real animals, on set, close enough to smell. Animal welfare regulations governed every moment of their presence, which meant the simplest solution, putting performers near living apex predators, was also the impossible one. The production developed a layered approach that combined live animal footage, animatronic stand-ins, and digital integration with a precision that required months of planning. Real tigers were filmed separately, their authentic movements captured by trained handlers who understood how the animals actually moved under stress. Animatronic versions handled close-up shots where physical interaction with actors was required. Digital compositing brought the elements together in the edit, but the element that made it work was the performers themselves. Stunt choreography required actors to react convincingly to threats that weren't present during their takes, to commit physically and emotionally to a danger that existed only in the frame that would eventually be assembled around them. That commitment, invisible to most viewers, is what separates convincing illusion from obvious effect. Number 9. What Russell Crowe was actually hiding. The official account of Russell Crowe's injury during production described a simple tendon problem. The reality was considerably more serious. A fall during filming caused a cracked hip bone and early signs of osteonecrosis, a condition in which bone tissue begins to die from loss of blood supply. It was the kind of injury that ends athletic careers. It did not end production. What followed required a particular kind of stubbornness. Crowe worked with medical staff to manage pain levels that most performers would have used to justify shutting down. He adjusted his movements to protect the injury without making those adjustments visible on screen. He continued performing demanding stunt sequences while operating at a physical deficit he never publicly acknowledged. The irony is that the suffering translated, the exhaustion accumulating in Maximus across the film's second and third acts, the way he moves through the arena sequences with a heaviness that's different from the soldier we see in Germania, carries a truth that performance alone couldn't have manufactured. What Crowe was hiding from the crew, the camera was catching anyway. Number 10. The script that didn't exist yet. Gladiator began filming without a finished screenplay. This is not a metaphor for creative looseness or an eccentric directorial method. It is a literal description of the production's starting conditions. Large sections of the script existed only as outlines. Key scenes had placeholder dialogue. Character motivations were still being actively debated between writers, producers, and the director on days when those characters were scheduled to appear in front of a camera. Pages arrived overnight, sometimes hours before scenes were scheduled to shoot. Actors absorbed new dialogue in the early morning and performed it by midday, sometimes reworking the lines further based on what felt true to the characters they'd been developing under constantly shifting conditions. Entire motivations were reconstructed based on what had already been filmed the day before. Ridley Scott's role under these conditions went beyond direction. He was maintaining narrative coherence in real time, holding the emotional arc of a story that was still being written while simultaneously staging sequences that would eventually need to connect to scenes that hadn't been conceived yet. That he produced a film with as much structural integrity as Gladiator under those circumstances remains one of the more remarkable achievements in modern Hollywood production. Number 11. History. Bent to serve the story. The historians consulted during Gladiator's development provided accurate, detailed research. The writers read it carefully. Then they made their choices. Marcus Aurelius did not die at his son's hands. He died of illness, most likely during a plague, in 180 AD. Commodus ruled for over a decade, not briefly. Gladiatorial combat bore only a passing resemblance to the theatrical spectacle the film depicts. These are not oversights, they are decisions. Each historical liberty serves a specific narrative function. Changing Marcus Aurelius's death gives Maximus a personal motivation that the historical record couldn't provide, a murder he witnessed, a crime he must answer. Compressing Commodus's reign creates the urgency a revenge story requires. Reshaping the gladiatorial tradition produces combat that an audience unfamiliar with ancient Rome can read instinctively. The writers consulted historians to understand what they were departing from. That distinction matters. There is a difference between ignorance and deliberate myth-making, and Gladiator operates in the latter tradition, the same tradition that shaped Homer, Shakespeare's history plays, and every epic that has ever chosen emotional resonance over academic precision. Number 12. The language hidden in plain sight. Ridley Scott did not announce his symbols. He embedded them in the texture of the film and trusted audiences to feel what they couldn't necessarily articulate. The wheat fields that appear in Maximus's memory sequences are the most visible example. They represent home, peace, and the afterlife he moves toward throughout the story. But their function goes beyond symbolism. They are the film's emotional baseline, the state of being against which every subsequent scene of captivity and violence is measured. The hand-brushing gesture Maximus performs, fingers trailing through grain, through air, creates a physical thread connecting his past to his present. It is the gesture of a man reaching for something no longer there. Color temperature reinforces these themes without calling attention to itself. Warm gold governs every memory, cold blue dominates the arena and the palace. The audience feels the difference before they register it consciously. Strength and honor operates the same way. It is not a motto Maximus repeats for emphasis. It is a description of the only self he knows how to be, even when everything else has been taken. These layers don't announce themselves, they accumulate, and that accumulation is what separates a film people watch once from one they return to. Number 13. The crowd that knew what it was doing. Filling the Colosseum required more than bodies in period costume. The casting department understood that and went looking in unusual places. Historical reenactment societies provided performers who knew how Roman armor actually restricted movement, how formations worked, what combat at close quarters demanded physically. Rugby clubs contributed the kind of raw size and physicality that sells crowd violence without choreography. Military veterans brought the specific psychological bearing of people who understood discipline and formation. Strongman competitors supplied the physical presence that the camera catches differently than trained actors. What emerged on set was an atmosphere that actors and directors hadn't entirely planned for. Crowd energy in arena sequences came from people who understood, on some level, what they were simulating. Reenactors didn't need to be told how to react to a gladiatorial display. They had rehearsed versions of it for years. Their spontaneous responses created a feedback loop that the principal actors responded to in kind. Some of those improvised crowd reactions made the final cut. The energy they generated wasn't manufactured in a sound studio and added later. It was present during filming, which is the only way that kind of energy actually transfers to screen. Number 14. The film nobody wanted to bet on. Early test screenings for Gladiator produced results that made the studio nervous. Pacing confused some audiences. The genre itself was the problem as much as anything in the film. Gladiator epics had been box office poison for so long that the category alone triggered skepticism. Marketing teams struggled to position it. Was it an action film, a historical drama, a character study set in ancient Rome? The answer was all three, which made it difficult to summarize in a trailer. Studio anxiety had legitimate historical grounding. The genre's failures weren't distant memories. They were recent enough to cite by name. The budget was substantial, the production had been troubled, and the lead actor, while respected, had not yet proven himself as a star capable of opening a film of this scale. What the tracking numbers couldn't measure was word of mouth. When Gladiator opened, audiences who connected with Maximus's story told other people. The demographics that showed up weren't just the action audience the marketing had targeted. Viewers drawn to the emotional arc arrived in numbers nobody had projected. The film earned over $460 million worldwide. The genre nobody wanted to bet on became the template everyone tried to copy. Number 15. The genre that rose from the sand. Before Gladiator, the conventional Hollywood wisdom about historical epics was settled and specific. They cost too much, they failed too consistently, and modern audiences had no appetite for ancient worlds. The genre had been commercially dormant for decades. No serious studio executive was proposing a return to it. Then the numbers came in, and the calculation changed overnight. Within a few years, Troy, Alexander, Kingdom of Heaven, and 300 all entered production, each attempting to identify and replicate whatever Gladiator had done. Television followed. Rome and Spartacus both owe their existence to the appetite the film proved was there. Video game franchises built entire commercial identities around ancient warfare settings that gained new relevance in Gladiator's wake. The cultural reach extended beyond entertainment. Museums mounted special gladiatorial exhibitions and reported significant attendance increases. University enrollment in classical studies programs rose, with students naming the film as the entry point for their interest. What Gladiator triggered wasn't just an industry trend. It was a broad reassessment of whether ancient worlds had anything to offer contemporary audiences. The answer, it turned out, was something no marketing department had adequately measured: genuine human hunger for stories about honor, sacrifice, and the cost of maintaining dignity under systems designed to strip it away. Number 16. The voices you heard weren't always there. The conditions that made Gladiator's action sequences visually extraordinary made them orally disastrous. Armor clanking against armor across Malta's exposed locations, wind cutting through open sets during battle sequences, hundreds of extras generating noise that swallowed dialogue no microphone could isolate. Editors reviewing footage discovered that the sound recorded on set was frequently unusable, technically or creatively, or both. The solution was extensive additional dialogue recording, known as ADR, a process in which actors return to a sound studio months after production has wrapped and re-record their performances in synchronization with the visual. It is exacting, painstaking work that requires recreating emotional states that belong to a different time and place. What began as a technical necessity evolved into something more valuable. Watching their own performances with distance and objectivity, actors made adjustments, subtler reads, better calibrated reactions, choices they hadn't had the clarity to make on a chaotic set surrounded by hundreds of people. The final film's dialogue is, in many cases, a refined version of what was originally performed. Most viewers never hear the seam. That invisibility is its own kind of craft. Number 17. A score built for a dead world. Hans Zimmer and Lisa Gerrard faced a problem with no obvious solution. How do you score a world that no living person has heard? Roman music, its scales, its instruments, its relationship to ceremony and violence and grief, exists only in fragments of historical record. A straightforward orchestral approach would have been accurate to modern ears and completely wrong for ancient Rome. Something else was required. What they built rejected the expected in favor of the primal. Gerrard's vocal contributions used invented phonetics and wordless sounds that bypassed language entirely, communicating emotion through texture and pitch rather than meaning. Zimmer incorporated instruments, the Armenian duduk, the Hungarian cymbalom, whose particular timbres suggested age and distance without announcing themselves as historical props. The result was a score that felt ancient without pretending to be authentic. The impact of that choice rippled through every historical epic that followed. The Gladiator soundtrack established an auditory vocabulary for ancient worlds that composers working in the genre still navigate, sometimes in homage, sometimes in deliberate departure. Gerrard's vocal themes in particular achieved a cultural persistence unusual for film scores, performed in concert halls, used in athletic contexts, absorbed into the ambient soundtrack of early 21st century popular culture, without most people knowing exactly where they came from. Number 18. What the editor cut away. The film Ridley Scott delivered to the studio was not the film that reached theaters. Several sequences, extended battle passages, Senate deliberations, quieter character scenes performed with evident care, were removed during editing. Each cut was a decision about what the film was for. Was it a historical panorama, or was it the story of one man's journey through loss and vengeance? Scott and editor Pietro Scalia chose the latter, consistently at the expense of the former. Senate scenes provided historical texture but cost momentum. Additional battle sequences were technically impressive but narratively redundant. The first Germania battle had already established what needed to be established. Character moments that would have enriched the peripheral figures disrupted the tightening spiral toward Maximus's confrontation with Commodus. Each removal was arguably a loss. The cumulative effect of those removals was a film that moved. Extended versions and bonus materials have since surfaced some of this excised footage, allowing viewers to examine the road not taken. What they reveal, more than anything, is the difficulty of the editing decisions. The material that was cut wasn't bad. It was simply competing for the same screen time as something that mattered more to the story Scott was committed to telling. Number 19. Armor built for cameras, not combat. Real Roman gladiatorial armor was designed for one purpose: to keep its wearer alive long enough to entertain a crowd. It was heavy, restrictive, shaped by centuries of practical refinement under conditions where failure meant death. It was completely unsuitable for the demands of a film production requiring performers to execute complex choreography across multiple takes under a North African sun. The costume department built something that looked like Roman armor and performed like a film prop. Hidden padding absorbed impact from falls. Lightweight metals and engineered plastics replaced authentic materials while maintaining the visual weight and texture of the real thing. Flexible joints allowed movement that genuine Roman construction would have prevented. Optical properties were calibrated for how the materials would read under the specific lighting conditions of each set. The compromises are visible to specialists. Real gladiatorial helmets were often more utilitarian than the ornate designs the film required, and the integration of historical accuracy with performance practicality sometimes favored cinema over archaeology. But what the armor communicated, the weight of the Roman military tradition, the class distinctions between different types of gladiators, the visual grammar of ancient combat, arrived intact. The deception served the truth it was meant to carry. Number 20. The Rome that never existed. Ridley Scott made a choice early in development that shaped every subsequent creative decision. He was not making a historical document. He was making a myth. The distinction determined what kind of Rome would appear on screen, not the Rome that archaeologists have reconstructed from physical evidence, but a Rome that could hold the weight of a story about honor, loss, and the persistence of human dignity under systems designed to destroy it. The historical record complicates the film's version at nearly every turn. Roman architecture during the imperial period was substantially more colorful than the muted stone the film presents. Surfaces were painted, decorated, layered with ornament that centuries of exposure have stripped away. Social customs were more complex and more morally ambiguous than the film's cleaner moral geometry allows. The Colosseum under Commodus looked and functioned differently than what audiences see. Scott's mythic Rome chose clarity over accuracy and resonance over record. The result was a world that audiences could emotionally inhabit rather than academically observe, immediate, legible, and charged with meaning in the way that legends are charged with meaning. Not a reconstruction of how Rome was, a vision of what Rome could mean. Number 21. The tourism boom nobody predicted. The Colosseum was already one of the world's most visited sites before Gladiator arrived. What the film changed was the nature of the visit. Tourism boards in Italy began tracking an increase in visitors who arrived not as students of history, but as pilgrims to a place they had already experienced in a different register, who wanted to stand where Maximus had stood, in a structure they had already felt the weight of emotionally before they encountered it physically. Museums worldwide moved quickly to capitalize on the renewed appetite. Special exhibitions on gladiatorial combat, Roman military culture, and imperial politics mounted at institutions across Europe and North America drew audiences that classical antiquities had not previously reached. Artifacts that had spent years in storage rotation became centerpiece attractions. The institutions benefited, so did the artifacts, which found new audiences who arrived already emotionally prepared to find them significant. Universities reported enrollment increases in classical studies programs, with incoming students citing the film as the point at which ancient Rome became something they wanted to pursue seriously. What decades of dedicated scholarship had failed to accomplish, making the Roman world feel immediate and personally relevant to a mass audience, a single popular film achieved in a matter of months. The academics had mixed feelings about this. The students kept enrolling. Number 22. What every scene is actually about. The most durable epics operate on two levels simultaneously: the surface story you follow consciously and the deeper argument you absorb without realizing it. Gladiator is transparently a story about revenge. It is less transparently a sustained meditation on what survives when everything else is stripped away: name, rank, family, freedom, and whether anything that survives is worth fighting for. Maximus's journey answers that question in one direction. What remains when the Roman Empire takes everything from him is the thing the empire cannot legislate or confiscate: a sense of who he is and what his life means. What we do in life echoes in eternity is not a piece of inspirational dialogue. It is the film's central thesis, stated plainly enough to be quotable and deep enough to sustain the entire narrative structure built around it. The cinematography runs the same argument visually. Warm gold light governs every image connected to the life Maximus is trying to return to. Cold blue and grey dominate every image of captivity and empire. Audiences who couldn't articulate these choices were nonetheless shaped by them. Their emotional responses calibrated by visual decisions made in pre-production and executed with consistency across hundreds of shots. The film knows what it's arguing. It just doesn't interrupt the story to announce it. Number 23. The careers the arena launched. Russell Crowe had been a working actor of genuine skill for years before Gladiator. The film made him a movie star, which is a different category, not about talent, which he already possessed, but about the specific alchemy between a performer and a role that produces something audiences recognize as iconic. The Oscar confirmed what the box office had already established. He was now the kind of actor studios built films around rather than cast in them. Joaquin Phoenix arrived at Commodus from a career of interesting choices in smaller films. What he delivered was a villain of unusual complexity, a man whose cruelty emerged from specific and recognizable psychological wounds rather than abstract evil. The performance announced him as one of the most compelling actors of his generation, a reputation he has spent the subsequent decades doing nothing to diminish. The film's impact distributed itself beyond the lead performances. Connie Nielsen gained international visibility that had eluded her in European productions. Chimong Hansu established himself as a physical and dramatic presence capable of carrying significant dramatic weight. Costume designer Janty Yates won the Oscar for her work and became a primary resource for historical epics in the years that followed. The Colosseum the film built in Malta launched careers that extended far beyond the production's closing weeks. Number 24. The Oscar race that nearly fell apart. The Academy Awards do not reward films automatically. They reward campaigns, sustained, strategic efforts to position work in front of voters in ways that shape perception and generate momentum. Gladiator's campaign was not smooth. Studio politics complicated early advocacy. Budget overruns and production tensions had left some executives unenthusiastic about championing a film whose making had been as difficult as this one. Skepticism about whether action-heavy historical spectacle belonged in the serious awards conversation was genuine and widespread. Early screening efforts struggled to shift that skepticism. The film was being read as impressive entertainment rather than significant cinema, a distinction that matters enormously to Oscar voters and almost nowhere else. Campaign messaging pivoted toward the film's emotional architecture, the character work, the themes, the performances, and away from the scale and spectacle that had defined its marketing. What ultimately turned the campaign was organic. Critics who had connected with the film began saying so with more force. Audiences continued telling each other about it in the months after release, sustaining the kind of cultural conversation that marketing budgets cannot manufacture. On Oscar night, Gladiator won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor. The campaign that nearly stalled had produced the year's defining victory. What had begun as a gamble on a dead genre ended as evidence that the Academy's tastes were more Catholic than anyone had assumed. Number 25. Why it hasn't aged. Most films age. The effects that seemed revolutionary become visible as products of their moment. The cultural references that felt immediate become historical. The performances that felt naturalistic start to carry the mannerisms of a specific era. This is normal, and it happens to very good films as readily as to bad ones. Gladiator has not aged in any of these ways that matter. The visual effects hold, not because they were technically perfect, but because Scott used them to extend a physical world rather than replace one, and physical worlds don't become dated the way digital ones do. The performances, particularly Crowe and Phoenix, operate at a register that belongs to no specific decade. The score sounds, if anything, more unusual and distinctive now than it did in 2000, when its departures from convention were less fully understood. What actually explains the film's persistence is simpler than craft analysis suggests. It tells a story about a specific kind of refusal. A man who has lost everything that defined him externally discovers what remains when external definition is removed, and then refuses to pretend that the system taking things from him has the right to do so. That refusal is not a Roman idea or a Hollywood idea. It is an idea that belongs to every era in which human beings have found themselves reduced by power that exceeded their ability to resist it. Which is to say, it belongs to all of them, including this one. From a production that began without a finished script to a film that resurrected an entire genre, Gladiator's story behind the camera is as unlikely as anything that happens on screen. These 25 chapters reveal something the finished film doesn't show: how many times and in how many ways it nearly didn't exist. The chaos that plagued the production, the rewrites, the injuries, the improvisation, the death of a cast member before his scenes were done, didn't destroy the film, it fed it. The exhaustion was real. The grief was structured around genuine loss. The anger that Russell Crowe channeled into Maximus had somewhere specific to come from. What Ridley Scott built from those conditions is a film that has outlasted the moment that produced it. It revived a genre, reignited popular interest in the ancient world, and delivered a moral argument simple enough to quote and deep enough to sustain repeated examination. The arena it constructed, in Malta, in Morocco, in post-production facilities, turned out to be less important than the one it built inside its audience. If this film means something to you, leave it in the comments. And if you want more stories about what actually happened behind the films you think you know, subscribe. There's always more hidden in the cuts.